Yeah, it's basically just follow the agenda.
Okay, you're ready.
Ready? Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the Thursday, September 7th City Plan Commission meeting. Can I get a roll call, please?
Olson. Here. Dolly.
Here.
Case.
Here.
Colhane.
Here.
Hanson.
Here.
Stein.
Here.
And Chairman Stonebarger is absent, so Dolly will be chairing the meeting.
All right. First item on the agenda today is the approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion?
So moved. Second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor? Motion passes. Second item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the August 24th, 2017 meeting. Need a motion?
Second.
Motion by Stein, second by Colhane. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. The third item on the agenda is new business. So it looks like we have discussion on three resolutions.
So the first discussion item will be over the resolution amending section 210202 of the revised ordinances of the city of Watertown, establishing a sunset on unused conditional use variances, which this is resolution 2017-29. So if we refer to the resolution, I'm just going to, I guess, recite Justin's comments and background of where these changes came from. So where he's changing this ordinance to zoning ordinance throughout this resolution is just because it's unclear as to what this ordinance means, as this is fundamental law regarding Board of Adjustment procedure. This ordinance refers to the scope of authority of the Board of Adjustment, as well as to other zoning ordinances that are sparing scattered throughout the revised ordinances. And then here is just another revision. He's adding in Title 21, just clarity. Okay, then here where he's adding non-ministerial, non-preliminary, this time frame was have to better balance the due process needs of the aggrieved individual with the expectations of any person benefited by the initial decision, and changing that to 30 days instead of 60 just to keep it consistent with what Board of Adjustment rules. And then if we go down here, just changing this ordinance to zoning ordinance in a lot of places. And here where he's adding, in any case where the holder of a conditional use permit issued under the city zoning ordinance has not instituted the use or begun construction as applicable within 1 year of the date of approval, the permit shall be null and void. Similarly, any such conditional use upon its cessation or abandonment for a period of 1 year will be deemed to have terminated, and any future use shall be in conformity with zoning ordinance. And that is, this language would establish a 1 year sunset period for any outstanding conditional use. Currently, ordinance does not provide any such sunset provision. Effectively, without this sunset provision, conditional uses that have not been used are only eliminated by force of law in one of two ways. One, if the lot on which the conditional use permit was issued is rezoned to a district where the conditional use is not listed, or two, if the conditional use is struck in ordinance for the zoning district in question. A 1 year sunset exists for non-conforming uses. This sunset duration is therefore in keeping with an existing sunset time frame. And that is the most substantive change to this ordinance amendment. Language also with variances granted by the Board of Adjustment shall be treated as non-conforming uses pursuant to Chapter 2104 and shall otherwise lapse if the construction authorized by the variance has not yet begun within 1 year of the date approved. So that's where we're at with that one.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I asked last time to have this proposed resolution tabled until we had legal counsel. There are a couple things within the proposals that I want to take some issue with. The first has to deal with the number 8 when it talks about the holder of a conditional use permit. I think that's great language. I understand from a staff perspective that, you know, if someone is granted a conditional use permit and they don't exercise that conditional use permit, does that go on for perpetuity? How do we track it? And those types of things. And it's very common throughout the state and many entities to have some sort of a sunset provision. I think that's fine. The one thing I think is that the language at the end of number 8 where it says, and any future use shall be in conformity with zoning ordinance, I think the language is not necessary because all uses have to be in conformity with the zoning ordinance. That's just my own special take on it. My bigger issue, however, is with number 9, talking about variances being treated as a non-conforming use. It's never been my opinion, professionally or personally, that a variance is a non-conforming use. A variance is a relaxation in the terms of the ordinance, and then once a variance is granted to a property, and it's not necessarily granted to the individual, but it's granted to the property, that it goes with the land. And so you are basically making the decision that it's okay to put a building 5 feet closer to the land. So in my opinion, I think if you want to sunset the variance because it hasn't been constructed, why don't we have similar language that we've been proposed within the conditional use section? I did have a conversation with a former city attorney prior to his leaving and stated my objections to it. And his basic comment to me was that he understood where I was coming from. I provided 3 alternate forms of language that I thought maybe better served the intent of what staff was looking for. And the one that he thought was also applicable, I'm just going to read it for your discussion. A variance granted by the Board of Adjustment shall expire 1 year from the date upon which it becomes effective, if no construction authorized by the variance has commenced. Upon written request of the Board of Adjustment and prior to the variance expiration date, a 1-year time extension for the variance may be granted by the Board of Adjustment. I think that, in my mind, is probably what you were looking for, as opposed to making something a non-conforming use.
Todd, could you read the last part of that sentence again?
This to Brandy, and she could just maybe put it up on the board. It's number 3 at the bottom. This is language that I'm more comfortable with from a planner's perspective. Alternative option 1 that I had up there basically mirrored what was being proposed somewhat in the conditional use language. And the statement from the former city attorney said that number 3 allows for flexibility. It requires a variance, however, it requires the variance holder to be responsible for making the request. But he generally had okayed. I had not talked about this with the current.
And the way that is written, then a variance could be extended in perpetuity just as long as the holder comes back to the Board of Adjustments within 1 year.
If you don't exercise, yes, if you don't do the construction on it, it's incumbent upon the applicant to come back to the board, and the board at that point in time wouldn't have to extend it. They could say no. They could deny the permit, the variance at that time too.
And I think from our point of view, you know, we'd want them to come back before us and review it on a case-by-case basis.
I think my biggest heartburn was just that the statement that a variance was a non-conforming use, and I just, what I do professionally just doesn't jive with me. Mr. City Attorney, did you have any comments? It's about second grade, I think. Huh?
So then with that, I do think that that language that is proposed in option 3 is what we'd be looking for.
Well,
I
would make them. Are we going to handle these one at a time, or did you want to do it all at once? All three together.
for this resolution, or,
Okay, we're just doing number A right now, right?
yeah, yep.
Is today just for discussion purposes, or are we taking a motion?
No, we'll add that in because then we're looking at the public hearing and
Oh.
action at the September 21st planning
Okay.
commission meeting, so the next one. But then that language is what will amend to this proposal. And then,
Do you need a motion to that effect to move forward with that?
Or just consensus from, I agree with the language that Todd has proposed. Is there-
Vince, that would be, as far as discussion, we don't need any action. Okay.
Okay.
No, so that's where,
Is there any objections to Todd's idea? Okay, so then,
No.
then staff will know to bring it back in the revised format.
All right, perfect.
sounds good. And was there any further discussion with this resolution? No? All right, on to B. This will be a discussion on the resolution amending section 210207 of the revised city ordinances of the city of Watertown, clarifying that incomplete construction projects with lapsed building permits are public nuisances. And this is resolution 2017-28. Okay. The background is the rationale of this addition is that it makes explicit that buildings that are not constructed within a reasonable period of time or that are allowed to languish in a state of partial construction for over a year should be declared public nuisances. Such public nuisances may be abated or torn down per SDCL 21-10-5 if a court agrees that abatement is warranted. A derelict, Justin has big words, construction is a public nuisance because it is one which affects at the same time an entire community or neighborhood or any considerable number of persons, although the extent of the annoyance or damage inflicted upon the individuals may be unequal. And that is per SDCL 21-10-3. A derelict construction would fall under the statutory definition of nuisance as it arguably annoys, injures, or endangers the comfort, repose, health, or safety of others, and renders other persons insecure in life or in the use of property, in how it impacts the property values or neighboring landowners. And that is per SDCL 21-10-1.
Thank you, Brandy. This has been a topic that's come up repeatedly over the years with this kind of scenario. So I was really excited to see, this proposal come before us. Looking for any feedback from the other members of the board.
I'm a little confused just from the language itself. It's the last sentence is predicated on the previous. After such an extension, are those extensions only to commercial and industrial uses? Maybe I'm reading this wrong. It says, in the event a commercial or industrial building is issued for more than 1 year, the permit fee for each additional year shall be 1/2 the original permit fee. The building official is authorized to grant in writing upon request of the applicant and payments of an administrative fee one or more extensions of the expiration date of a building permit in increments of up to 1 additional year. Is that predicated on the 3-year extension for commercial industrial, and therefore the extension is based upon that previous sentence. I understand what you're doing. I'm just wondering if it reads correctly.
It's a really good question.
Currently, right now, is it the practice to issue a permit for a single year, except for commercial industrials, could be issued up for 3 years. And then if I don't construct in a single year according to it, and I can get another extension under a residential building permit for another year. Is that the practice? For another half of the fee. So then if it doesn't happen within that extension period, then it expires, and then it becomes a nuisance, is what you're trying to say. Okay. I agree with the premise. I'm just not sure if the language is correct. It's confusing to me. I would defer to any legal opinion.
The legal opinion is that the language could be tighter because the use of after such doesn't clearly point to the extension.
Okay.
So that's something for the public hearing, and
Maybe just maybe have legal counsel tighten that language for us.
And the intention is to apply to all zoning districts equally.
correct.
I noticed a different issue, or at least it seemed like an issue to me, in the actual language. After such an extension, any lapse of a building permit when, quote, substantial construction of the permitted building has not been completed. Anytime I see like a modifier like that, that scares me. Do we have a definition for substantial construction? Or what? How do we determine?
Is that 50%, 75%?
You're right. That's one of those fudge terms.
Yeah, because FEMA substantial is 50%.
And I'm going back to high school debate. I do recall some sort of definitions for substantial. I just wasn't sure if there was a statutory or an ordinance definition for substantial that we could refer to, or how that left us, because that.
Yes, Gray.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I noticed.
Well, even FEMA's reference of 50% has to do with the value, not the progress of the project, I believe, so.
Right, yeah, that's just their substantial improvement or damage. However, and that's a completely different topic, because that is going off of property value, and then not even property, just on the value of the structure that they're wanting to improve.
From a staff perspective, how often are you seeing a residential building permit not being completed within 2 years? 1 year with a 1 year extension. Does it happen very often? Okay, so do we want it to stop from happening? Why don't we just say if it's not completed after the extension, it's a public nuisance, as opposed to making a judgment call?
Right.
And if I can have up to 3 years to do a commercial construction project, that's going to get almost 99% of most commercial construction projects.
Right. And then Liam, where is that language referenced at for substantial?
At the bottom of paragraph 2, it's the underlined portion in my packet. After
Okay.
it's the new, which I assume to mean the new language. After such an extension, any lapse of a building permit when, quote, substantial construction of the permitted building has not been completed.
So maybe just take when the permitted building has not been completed, and just take substantial construction out.
That would-
If that's what you're looking for, from a staff perspective.
Yeah, it seems like a squishy way to say it, and anytime you have a squishy language like that, you have people like me creating trouble for you.
Yeah, I think I'd rather see it either removed or quantified in some matter.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
mean-
think that's a good point.
If you wanted to look for some other examples where you can either 75% of the value, or how you come up with that, I don't know. But if staff feels more comfortable with the quantifying it as opposed to just saying it's all or nothing.
I believe even our ICC codes, our international building and residential codes, I believe that they stay away from defining what substantial is. But we can double check that.
Okay.
And maybe it is a term of art. I'm not familiar with it, and so if there is a term of art where we can at least say that most of the time it means X, I would be comfortable with it. If it isn't a term of art, it leaves a lot up for interpretation.
Right. So if it was, where I think it makes sense to not even include it, either it's done or not. And I mean, if you guys do want to include like 75% completed, that we could define substantial. But that would also add to more.
I don't think that solves the problem of the 1% that we can't get finished. I think it's got to be complete.
I
can't. I didn't have a conversation about this with building official Ken Buchholz, but it might just solve the problem to just omit substantial. That might be the better option, in my opinion. Omit it.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Any other discussion with this resolution? All right. We'll get that added. Now for the third is discussion on the resolution amending section 210404 of the revised ordinances of the City of Watertown, ensuring that non-conforming grandfathered uses that are discontinued or abandoned for a year automatically cease at the end of that year. And this is resolution 2017-30. It's a short one, except might need some changes. So the background is this revision was derived from Matthews Municipal Ordinance. It is not legally required that the building official send out a certified mail notice of the lapse of non-conforming use. Admittedly, South Dakota has not explicitly joined those states like Minnesota that have declared that ordinance can automatically set the lapse period. Generally, there must be shown some intent of the landowner to abandon. However, South Dakota case law appears to support such an automatic phase out. See Brown County versus Meidinger. The policy towards non-conforming uses is to prevent their expansion beyond the bounds of non-conforming use at the time of the effective date of the zoning ordinance. The policy aims toward eventual phase out of non-conforming uses and seeks to do so as quickly as possible. Indeed, statute appears to allow for an automatic phase out. See SDCL 11-6-39, which states if the nonconforming use is discontinued for a period of time more than 1 year, any subsequent use, lot, or occupancy of the land or premise shall be in conformance with such regulation. Proof of a year of non-use, one picture at the start, one picture at the end of the period, is going to be a good indicator of the landowner's intent to abandon regardless. One thing to think about, we could sunset nonconforming uses much sooner. The South Dakota Supreme Court has interpreted SDCL 11-4-6 as allowing cities to adopt much more stringent zoning regulations than state law provides, and specifically with regard to nonconforming uses sunsetting. And he has a reference to City of Marion versus Rapp, 2002, South Dakota.
Thank you, Brandy. This was one I had some conversation with Justin before he departed, and I had some concerns over the language that was used here, and how it could be potentially problematic for a number of older non-conforming lots in our town. So the language states that if a non-conforming use is discontinued or abandoned for more than 1 year, the non-conforming use shall cease, and the use shall therefore conform to the provisions of the ordinance. And in Title 21.9, we define non-conforming use as any building, structure, or use of land which does not conform to the regulations of the district or zone in which it's situated. Now, we've got a lot of thinking of this in terms, I started looking at the residential property specifically, and we have a large number of residentially zoned properties, particularly in the older sections of town, which don't meet the current zoning regulations for things like setbacks and lot size and so on and so forth. So my concern would be if you had an empty property, if you had a house that wasn't actively being used, is that considered to be discontinued or abandoned in the language of this ordinance? And would it then become no longer, how am I trying to say this? Would it pose an issue then trying to sell or disposition that property, or to even use it as a residence in the future?
I'm in complete agreement. Without notice provisions, I find that very difficult to make that determination. A person doesn't live in their house because they're in a assisted living center or being treated for cancer for a year, and they want to move back into their house, and you took a picture on September 7th of this year, and they're gone for a year, and now they want to move back in and turn the water back on, and you're going to say, oh, no, I'm sorry, you got to tear the house down. Without proper notice, I think that's problematic from a due process perspective, even though there are some case law in the state that seems to lean that way. I think it's right. 1 year, we need to figure out how to get rid of nonconformities, because zoning is really more prescriptive than anything. It's moving forward, and the only way we get rid of things is through nonconforming rules and regulations. However, I would rather say that we maybe need to have. I'd like to know what the administrative process would be for implementing this new rule.
I don't know if it would just, and I don't really know how it would come to our attention that it was abandoned, other than, it would be the period of time before it was even observed. So as far as the time frame would be hard to regulate, because a place could sit vacant for 6 months until a picture is taken, and then it starts to go into a year, while another person could be caught the day after, and then they have less time, type of thing.
If I have a house that maybe, or a manufactured home in a resident R2 district that doesn't meet, or something like that, and I'm still paying my water and utility bills, I just might not be living in it. Is that being used? How would you define that from a staff perspective?
Feasibly, you could even have a home that was actively listed on the market that didn't sell within a year time frame. We had a housing crisis here a few years back, and there was many homes that took a long period of time to transact.
Well, maybe I'm missing something, but is there some frequent occurrence or some compelling, circumstances that's would require rewriting this at all? I'm not sure I'm understanding that.
Right now, it says that the building official has to provide notice to the property owner. Are we trying to get rid of that notice requirement? Is that the purpose for this?
I'm actually not sure why it was prompted, but I'm assuming it was just trying to clean up something that maybe we were being more strict on.
Does the city track non-conforming properties currently?
My concern with this is it's going to cause more problems than whatever little ones we're trying to solve, in my view.
Right, because if there was a structure that had been abandoned and it was something that we were hoping that would be brought into conformity, then they would just be sent notice.
You have the tool in your toolbox right now. Is if you see something, somebody makes a complaint, you check into it. It's non-conforming. The building official makes that determination. He puts them on notice, and as long as they don't do anything for a year, you can start an abatement process or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I was too. Right now, we have, you know, that option or the discretion to be able to take these on a case-by-case basis. If you move to an automatic, then a person that's in a genuine situation where, you know, maybe they have a legitimate reason for having the place abandoned, they could be forced into a legal bind, right, by having an automatic language here.
Right, and then somebody gets caught, the next person doesn't. So it kind of, I can see that. It's vague. Vince, do you have any?
Boils down to the issue of notice and due process.
So would your recommendation be to leave it with the existing language?
Well, that would be a policy question, but I think you need to have notice even if you change, there still needs to be a notice provision before you take away that property right. Or should be a notice provision before you take away a property right.
Sounds good. So maybe the direction is that this amendment isn't necessary. Is that where you guys are at?
That's where I'm at.
I think I'm with that too. I think we could maybe just pause, come back, and maybe think about this a little bit better. Maybe give staff an opportunity to think about administratively how they want to proceed with this. I don't have a problem adding the words abandoned to discontinued. I mean, there's some words in here that are fine. The idea of striking the notice requirement is somewhat problematic for me.
Sounds good. So we'll still have a public hearing on this amendment. I'm wondering if I leave the language as is, and then I'll leave the language that's crossed and then leave the language that's added, and then so it can be approved as the discussion has went without having to amend the resolution. If that's the page we're on. So just unstriking the language of this current ordinance. Sorry, I made that really confusing.
Make sure I understand what you're saying, Brandy. You're saying leave all the new language as such, however, the stricken language would be restored to existing.
Yeah.
I would be fine with that.
Okay. Any additional comments from the board?
Just to be clarified, I don't mean to beat the dead horse, but we're leaving the added language and leaving everything stays basically.
Yep.
Well, some of this doesn't jive.
Yeah, it's going to have to be reworded.
Okay.
Yeah, I
but
mean,
we can hammer that out next.
I think structurally, the intent would be to not strike language that has anything to take away notification.
Okay. And then we just
we
can clean up the shells and maze.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sounds good.
Yeah. We'll make it read what the intent of it is. Sounds good.
Brandy, I have something on B that I wanted to bring up on the engineering standpoint. On the word substantial, we do use substantial completion on most of actually all of our projects in the engineering world. So when we give a notice of substantial completion, we're pretty much saying that project is almost finished, other than the final punch list that we create on the final walkthrough. And so I don't know, I'm not trying to sway anyway. I know there was confusion of what the word substantial was and where it's coming from, and I wanted to let you guys know that we do use that, and we just filled one out today for the skate park. And they did follow through on their punch list, and now we're going through the paperwork of final completion now. So we do use substantial. And
I'm
on a
fine
daily
with that. Let's
basis.
just define it then, what it means. If you want to keep substantial in, just define it.
And I'd be really curious to know if there is some place within state law, if it is defined or quantified in some area, and then we could refer to state law in that regard.
It would be better just to define it yourself, because then state law can change underneath you.
That's a good point. Yeah.
You want to have that.
I guess my opinion is we're trying to clean house on that, again, 1% that just isn't getting done. To me, I think we just leave substantial out. It's either done or it's not. This isn't the first rodeo for this.
Are you guys good with that? Just leaving substantial out. Okay.
I'm fine with it.
Sounds good.
And so there's no action to take on the new business that we've discussed. Is there any old business?
Nope.
Could I have a moment just to talk about a moment just to talk about some stylistic changes. If you look at your ordinance structure and how it's come before you on a resolution that recommends an ordinance that goes to city council to act upon. So let's just use the first one as an example. And you see a series of this ordinance being crossed out and then zoning ordinance being added. And then paragraphs that are included in the ordinance that have no changes. And you go through, not you, I mean, as you read this, I'm not saying you're doing something wrong, but what you're doing by creating an ordinance or enacting an ordinance that states a lot of stuff that is already in there or has a minor change is all of that needs to be printed in the public notice on the enactment of the ordinance instead of something that is this paragraph, these changes, then this paragraph, these changes, or insertion or deletion. And so what you might see in the future, as long as I'm in this chair, is ordinances that the ordinance will actually have a more disjointed type of look because it won't all read, but then as an attachment for information will be something that looks like this. And so that the ordinance itself that is the changes will be much shorter. The review document for you will then look something that's more like what you're seeing. Just saves money.
My other quick question, I guess, on that whole thing, on that first section where it talks about zoning ordinance from this ordinance. Well, some places we reference this ordinance as Title 21, and some places we just say this ordinance to zoning ordinance. So there's some continuity issues there too. Either just the very first time we see it in paragraph A where it says this ordinance, just say Title 21, or hereafter we, whatever, reviewed that way. That way we don't have to keep changing that.
That is a good observation. I had that written down actually and forgot to mention it.
About
But
it
in
too.
2017-30 resolution that we discussed tonight, it actually says this ordinance in the new language that was proposed, and we should probably be consistent across the board there.
Yeah.
So, for Resolution 2017-29, where it is making all those changes of this ordinance, do we want to call it the zoning ordinance? And then
Just
refer
say this ordinance, or to ordinance hereafter referred to as.
I'll take you
Have
through that
Vince
one.
write that.
Okay.
We just need to be straight all the way through.
Sounds good. That was a good catch.
Okay. No old business. Any need for executive session?
No.
Need a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.